So, I think people think that when they take up a spiritual path or meditation or yoga or even a hobby or a career like music or art, that it will make them happy all the time, and that it will make them uh, more able to deal with the vicissitudes of life. So when they have a bad meditation or a bad day, or it doesn't make the changes that they thought it would make so quickly, they tend to give up and look for something else. This is a kind of product of Western culture, that we're restless and we don't take time to master things. We're impatient. We press a button and we get what we want. And we don't have a lot of resilience and patience, basically. Commitment, to master something. But nothing can be mastered quickly unless, you're a bit of a savant. Even relationships, relationships have their ups and downs. They're like the tide, and that's why we need to develop a sense of kind of equanimity and patience to deal with the times that are not so, where everything's not flowing so easily. And things can be totally crap, but it's still an opportunity for awakening. It's still a chance to grow. So those times where things are not going so well, where we feel numb or we feel bored or we feel overwhelmed, these are also the times, actually often the most time, where we can grow. So in a sense, nothing is to be rejected on the spiritual path. Everything is a chance to grow. That doesn't mean that we need to pursue suffering or beat ourselves up or get ourselves involved in things we're not interested in. But it means that the daily fodder of life, the daily grind, is the compost to grow the roses of insight. So why do we fail to turn up to the present moment? Why are we always seeking something new, something more shiny, something more interesting, and abandoning ourselves, abandoning our suffering, abandoning the things that need our attention? Part of it has to do with the fact that from a small age we're looking outward, looking into the world, learning about material things, and not really given this, in my experience, this society doesn't give a lot of respect to the inner life. Maybe it once did, mostly for rich white men, Lord Byron and the Renaissance men, the poets, the artists, the musicians, but everybody else was still trying to survive, so they didn't have a lot of time, unless maybe they lived in the country or they were particularly religious. They didn't have a lot of time for the inner life, Whereas in Asia and the East, especially India, that is the pinnacle of existence, and people who pursue the inner life are deeply revered. And that's considered a legitimate career, to contemplate and to purify the mind. Those people are considered an asset to society, whereas here they would be regarded as a weirdo. But it's learning to do your contemplation fruitfully, and to not be just wallowing in unskillful states of mind. Learning to deal with the mind so that it becomes illuminated, and so that our best, most luminous nature appears, you know, is the challenge. And I sent out an email recently with the 4 Brahma Viharas, and they're 4 states of love, which is wishing others to be free of suffering, the first one is loving kindness, metta, wishing others to be happy. The second one is compassion, wishing others to be free of suffering. The third one is rejoicing in the happiness of others and the achievements and spiritual realizations of others. And the fourth one is equanimity. That's the key, the difference between spiritual states of compassion or altruistic love and our normal states of love, which are mostly mired in attachment or what we can get from someone, and not just loving someone for who they are without expectation, without reservation. Equanimity is an even, impartial state of mind, not an apathy, but a broad state of mind where we realize we're not clinging, we're open and spacious, you know, and that is a better way to be in our relationship with others, and even our own thoughts and our own passions, you know. But somebody said to me after I sent this email, it probably wasn't a very good translation that I sent, because it defined compassion as knowing others' suffering as our own, which I, on reflection, probably shouldn't have sent it like that. But compassion, so, you know, our friend was saying, oh, it's a burden, you know, not knowing others, experiencing others' suffering is a burden, and why would you want to do that? And how could that be skillful? It could just make you more heavy, you know. And I just thought about that, you know, and what I realized was that we can't really be present to the suffering of others until we're present to our own suffering, until we have a capacity to deal with not just the joy, because everybody wants joy. That's why we take up the spiritual path. That's why we pursue relationships. That's why we have children. That's why we study for, you know, a career. We think it will bring us happiness, or at least, you know, a better way of living, a way to survive. And when inevitably these things bring up challenges, we sometimes cast them aside because they didn't turn out the way we thought. It would have been good if somebody had told us in the beginning of life, not everything is meant to be easy. Not everything is meant to just make you happy. You're also meant to grow. And that is how you become a full, balanced, strong human being. That is how you build resilience. That is how you build empathy. That is how you test your mettle. And if somebody had told me that from the beginning, I think it probably would have helped me a lot. Yeah. So, you know, it's a wisdom to know when to stay in a situation that you're growing and you're being challenged and you're learning new skills, and when it's just pointless misery and unhealthy and it's time to move on. knowing that is also the wisdom of experience. But the reason I thought about, you know, why compassion is useful and why building a relationship with the world, as well as building your own inner life, is beneficial and profound. Well, for one, the world is our mirror. The world shows us where we're stuck. It's like a Tibetan Buddhist slogan: meditate on whatever provokes resentment, whatever shows you your soft spot, where the world presses your button, shows you the things you haven't resolved about yourself. But also, a person who hasn't had the passion of compassion ignited in them, they're like a piece of wood that has not yet come alight. And when you have ignited your sense of meaning, your sense of passion, your sense of maybe what you're meant to do with your life. Not to say that everybody needs only one thing that they're meant to do. There's so many things we're meant to do. But when you fall in love, when you find a passion, when you find something that you can channel, which is greater than yourself, you're like a piece of wood that becomes a light. And the reason why we cultivate states of loving kindness and compassion in Buddhism is not so that we pointlessly enter a codependent relationship with others or that we abandon ourselves, but so that we become a light in the world, that we come alive, we come a light with compassion. And this passion is not as fragile and not as unhealthy as attachment. There's nothing wrong with having a bit of passion about things, but too much passion, too much attachment, and usually our self-agenda. You know, we like someone because they benefit us, they confirm the ideas we have about ourselves. We don't like others because they, you know, challenge who we think we are and what we value. Yeah, when this this love or this passion that we have comes awake, comes alive, catches a light in the spiritual sense, there is no suffering from that kind of love. There is a little bit, but not as much as a passion which is full of attachment, because it's wholesome, it leads to liberation, it leads to deep insight, it purifies, it clears away what is meaningless, what is not essential, and it benefits others, benefits us, and it benefits others. So for that reason, compassion is something to aspire to. From, like, the story of the Buddha was, he was a prince, he was in his late 20s, he had every comfort a human being could like. There was a prediction made at the time of his birth by the wise man Asita, and Asita told Siddhartha was the Buddha's name before he got enlightened. He told Siddhartha's father, your son is very sensitive. He has a big heart. And if he is exposed to the suffering of the world, he will renounce the world and seek a way out of suffering. He'll become a spiritual leader that will benefit millions. Whereas if you protect him from the suffering of life, don't let him see it, he'll become a great king. And his father was a pretty worldly person, so he's like, yeah, let him be a great king. He can be a holy man in his old age. So Siddhartha's father kind of wrapped him in pleasures, and, you know, everybody around him was beautiful, healthy, able-bodied, attractive, the best at what they did. You know, the best musicians, the best artists, the best concubines, the best wife, the most attractive people, the most intelligent, you know, and he learned mathematics and astronomy and all of the holy teachings available at the time. But his father could not stop life getting in, the soft spot, the place that scares you, the thing that triggers you, you know, shows you what you have to master, what you have to learn, right? Where your purpose is. Presses the button. And I think maybe it's a bit like that when we find someone who's meant to be our partner. You know, there's that karmic connection where they just press this thing in you that all your tenderness, all your vulnerability, all of your longing comes, you know. And I think falling in love with the spiritual path is a bit like that too. Like, you find a teacher, you find a teaching that just turns that button and everything turns on. Everything comes alive. The fire ignites. Like, as a bad city slicker, I throw some flammable liquid on my fire and it goes poof. So basically, those hardships, those challenges, whatever we are going through, if we take it with insight, if we take it with equanimity and we look at it and we examine it, it will reveal itself to us. And it becomes the key that opens the door to insight. So everything, this present moment, this life, this joyous experience or this unpleasant situation, whatever it is, each day, each moment is revealing the door of insight that we can just walk through, that we sit with it. We don't just run away. We don't just seek distraction. We're always doing that in the present moment. Whatever feeling arises, we seek pleasure, we seek distraction. If something is unpleasant, we immediately push it away. And if something is pleasurable, we immediately pull it to us. But we, in the midst of all of this seeking pleasure and pushing away the things we don't like, we're missing the present moment. We're missing life. Anyway, I've gone off track. So, life got in. The Buddha-to-be saw someone sick who was extremely sick, like half their body was swollen and covered in wounds and crying out in pain, because there was no surgeons or antibiotics in these days. Illnesses were medieval and gnarly. And then he saw old age, no teeth, leaning on a staff. He saw a person couldn't hear properly, couldn't see properly, living in poverty, regarded as a burden, and then he saw a dead body being carried away to the burning ghats, and he said to his friend and charioteer Channa, "You mean that will happen to me?" And Channa said, "Yes, my lord, you will become as lifeless as a piece of wood. Your friends who you love, your children, will be left bereft. You'll never see them again. All that you've invested in, your name, your fame, your career, your wealth, will be left behind. You'll travel on alone, a refugee." And that really shocked him, and when someone close to you dies, it is a shocking thing and a harsh thing. And when you realize, if you have a near-death experience, whether you're ill or whether you have an accident, you realize how easily life can be taken away, just like a hair is pulled out of a butter lamp. So everything is a chance to wake up. Everything is an invitation. Just sit with it, observe it, be patient with it. Don't just push away unpleasant things and seek pleasure. Be equanimous and sit with things that are arising in the present moment, because they reveal the nature of truth to you. So the more we know how to be present with our feelings or whatever it is arising without running away, we hold to our seat, the more resilience we develop, the more capacity to process. So what we want to avoid is wallowing in misery, but we also want to avoid, like if you look at your mind after a while, you'll see it's basically usually in a constant state of attachment or aversion or indifference, when it's just numb and there's nothing going on, and basically it's like a little toddler just picking things up and then throwing them down again, and it has its little tantrums. It's not very patient, but over time it becomes more calm, like a mountain lake, more equanimous, and the bliss can arise, the bliss and insight, and you see that there is this luminous nature, there is this beauty, there is this joy that has no cause. So, working with the mind to not get it distracted by things that arise, by thoughts and feelings, observing them. We're not suppressing them, and we're not acting out on them. We're sitting in the middle, and that in itself gives rise to insight, and that insight gives rise to awakening and joy and clarity. But that doesn't mean that it's always wonderful and it's always happy. It just means that we see, to have good roses, you need good mulch. Yeah. So therefore, life itself, life's experience, daily life, mind states, whether pleasant or unpleasant, are all grist for the mill. They're all part of awakening. So I think sometimes when people come here, there's a certain kind of pressure on me to be transcendental, to be holy, to be always wise, always say the right thing, always be entertaining. And when I'm not, when I'm just human, people either find that appealing because that means they can trust me, I'm authentic, I'm not lying, or they get disappointed because they want a fantasy of the same with relationships. There's people who want a fantasy partner, and that's why they keep running from one person to another, because they don't want a real person. They want a fantasy, and there's people who find someone and work with, they find that person has enough qualities to ignite love in them. But they also, the more you stay with someone, the more you realize they're also flawed. But that's part of their beauty, So, yeah, the spiritual path is kind of love the one you're with, love the moment you're with, love the mind state you're with, be present, be curious, be open, learn to sit through unpleasant experiences without flinching, learn to face the places that scare you, learn to untie the knots that are within you, because the result, the fruit of practice is bliss and joy and rapture and peace. And when you have sat with your emotional patterns, your thoughts, without running away, without getting distracted, just being present, just being patient, just being open, you can hold space for other people's suffering as well. So, then knowing the suffering of others as your own is not a source of misery. It's a source of insight. It's a source of it's just like like cleaning a window with some newspaper and Windex. The more you clean the window, the more dirt comes out. It can be a bit hard work and a bit unpleasant, but then in the end there's this beautiful reflection. So in that sense, compassion is the capacity to hold space for our own suffering without flinching, with our own joy, without being carried away. It is the work of building right relationship, of seeing someone for who they are rather than who you want them to be. But it's also seeing yourself in others and understanding, having empathy for their experiences, and understanding that you're in a sacred relationship with all of life, and allowing life to touch you, to touch your tender places, and to be moved, and to develop a boundless love that ignites you. So that is why we develop compassion, because it shows us a broader vista of connection and joy. It can also be hard sometimes when you're, so that's why we have self-care, and that's why we have time alone and retreat. And there's nothing wrong with that. And everybody has a different capacity for, building right relationship with all of heaven and earth, And sometimes I see this obsession in Western society with, like, if you're alone, there's something wrong with you. If you want to be quiet and do nothing, there's something wrong with you. if you want to leave society, there's something wrong with you. But there is a great amount of activity, um, and conversation and consumption that is not mindful, that is not skillful, that does not lead to liberation and joy. That is an empty way that we distract ourselves from the mess inside. And that is why sometimes people can be smiling on the outside, entertaining, making jokes, and then go home and kill themselves. Because that emptiness, and not actually knowing how to sit with and comfort and transform your own feelings. That is a skill to develop, you know. And there's nothing wrong with people reaching out for help, to be held when they can't hold themselves, when the pain is too strong. But yeah, there's a lot to be said for learning to process your own feelings and pain and suffering, if you can, depending on the level of trauma you have. But one has to do that for themselves before they can do it for others. I was kind of going somewhere with that, but yeah. So there's a lot of distraction, a lot of useless things, a lot of unnecessary things, a lot of pointless consumerism, distraction, information that does not lead to liberation, that does not lead to joy. And that is why Buddhists appreciate simplicity and retreating from the world and solitude. That is why Buddhists admire that, as long as it's skillful. Like there's this saying amongst Tibetan lamas, you know, everybody wants to go to a cave, but animals live in a cave too, and they're not enlightened. So, you know, it's like, what are you doing in the cave? You know, how skillfully are you relating with your mind states? You know, how are you making your time alone productive and not just hiding? You know, because coming into relationship with life can also be a learning. You know, but anyone who says that going for a retreat or living alone on a mountain is easy has not done a long retreat, because the hardest thing is to work with no distractions, to work with your own mind. It is the hardest kind of work. But there is so much that is unnecessary, that is does not lead to joy. You know, that is why people on the spiritual path simplify their lives. And that is why sometimes some monks, all they'll be left with is a bowl this big. It's like a little suitcase, 3 robes and a bowl and a sitting cloth and a sewing kit and a water filter. These are the 2,600-year-old implements that a monk has. But, you know, a monk is also in a relationship of dependence. They live on the donations of others, and without that sacred relationship with lay people, that interaction, without offering the fruits of their insight, they can't survive. So even a monk is not an island. Yeah. So it's that middle path. But in the end, the Buddha, after seeing birth, old age, sickness, and death, pursued the path of awakening, became a monk, and lived alone for many years after studying with several different teachers and meditating with some other friends. He decided to go off alone under the Bodhi tree. And but after he got enlightenment, he thought, who could possibly understand this awakening, this freedom from conceptuality, this joy, this bliss, this interconnectedness? Who could possibly understand this? And then he thought of his previous meditation companions, 5 other men who were pretty much invested in torturing themselves. And he came back and taught them, and then, you know, gradually meeting people one-on-one or sometimes in a large group, they would start following him. But he didn't proselytize. He only taught when he was invited to teach and when people were open. And he became known as the Buddha, the Awakened One. He taught poor people and rich people alike. He received food from beggars and kings alike. And in his community, he welcomed people from any caste, people from any gender, as long as they were sincere and ethical and kept the rules he set down for harmonious living, for doing no harm. And he had the fourfold sangha, the disciple, the householder yogis, married people or people with jobs, who would come to the monastery, you know, for a few days, a month, or, you know, when they could, when they had time. And then the monastics, who were like the specialists, you know, committed to this path of simplicity, this path of reflection, this path of insight, this path of taming the inner wilderness. And he shared that way of awakening until he passed away at age 80. And then gradually over time, Buddhism spread from India down the Silk Road with merchants, all the way to China, all the way to the borders of Greece, like medieval Greek monks ordained. And as Buddhism spread down the Silk Road through China, through Japan, you know, Zen Buddhism developed. After 200 years, 300 years, the archetype of the Bodhisattva, the compassionate spiritual warrior who comes back to this world again and again to liberate others, who wants to become a fully awakened Buddha to show the world awakening, that ideal of the Bodhisattva, like that white statue outside of Kuan Yin, became more appealing, and therefore Mahayana Buddhism developed in Japan and Mongolia and Tibet and Northern Asia. But the way of the elders, Theravada, the more simple teachings given by the Buddha, with an emphasis on getting out of birth and death, becoming an arhat. An arhat is a liberated person whose mind is completely purified of ignorance and self-grasping, but who doesn't have the merit, the good karma, to come back again and again, nor the wish, the paramis, the merit, is not following the path of the perfections. Therefore has, you know, just leave, when they die, they leave the world and don't come back. So that's the emphasis in Theravada Buddhism. And Theravada Buddhism is a little more simple, in the sense that monks and nuns keep the vows very strictly, very directly. There is an emphasis on meditation,